Good afternoon and welcome to Pop Talk. I'm Hannah Petrie, Unitarian Universalist minister and proud board member of POP, that's Pasadena's Organizing for Progress, the nonprofit that is leading Pasadena to become the model progressive city of the 21st century. My co-host, Ellen Snortland, is an author, filmmaker, and longtime columnist for the Pasadena Weekly. In honor of Black History Month, we have a very interesting guest today that Ellen recruited, both in terms of her work and her personal story. In 2015, Crystal Henderson left a career as a healthcare executive to pursue a passion for coaching women. She founded Life Unleashed Academy, a personal training and development company that helps women take a midlife crisis and turn it into a midlife revolution. In addition to being a coach, she is a mother of two daughters and has been married over 30 years. Crystal has always been interested in discovering her family's history. In 2015, shortly after her father passed away, she found the suicide note left by her grandfather in an obscure newspaper and unraveled a mystery that her father had been trying to solve his entire life. Her most recent genealogical pursuit has been to uncover the stories of her Cresswell and Lee families, early settlers of an all-Black township, Mound Bayou in Mississippi, created shortly after the Civil War. She recently began writing a novel based on her latest discoveries. Mrs. Henderson has a BA in marketing from Cal State Pomona and is currently in the creative writing certificate program at UCLA Extension, and she's an Alpha Kappa Alpha. So before we settle into our interview, we have a special song to get us started, requested by Crystal. This is Mound Bayou, sung by Maxine Sullivan.
Oh, Crystal, thank you for joining us on Pop Talk.
Thank you for having me. I just love that music. I love the music from the 1940s. So thank you for playing it.
Yeah, I was not even aware of Mound Bayou, but before we get into Black history and Mound Bayou and the story you're writing in your novel, tell us a little bit about your nonprofit, Life Unleashed Academy.
Yes, it's not a nonprofit, it is a for-profit company.
Oh, got it. I don't know how that happened. Okay. What inspired you to found it? Can you share an anecdote or two of success stories?
Yeah, absolutely. So I in around 2014, 2015, I had done a lot of personal training and development work, and I really got, and both of my daughters left for college, and so I was an empty nester, and I found myself floundering a little bit. Like, I understood that there was no longer a match between what I had been doing and what my heart was like telling me to do. And so I started really looking at what does it take to have a complete shift in career or identity or how you see yourself as a woman in her 40s and 50s. And so my business partner, Tracy, and I started creating programs and workshops to help women to discover that for themselves.
That's wonderful. So do you have anything that sticks out for you as far as a success story goes?
Absolutely. So we have one client who wrote a book. She wrote and actually published her memoir. And that was a huge deal for her. She'd been stuck she knew that like she had a story. I think all of us have like one great story in us. And she wouldn't allow herself the gift of going after that passion. So, and then I have another client who created a film festival for at-risk youth who, and it shows at the Sony Picture Studios in Los Angeles, and they write, direct, and produce short films.
That's great. So if people want to contact you, how would they contact you?
So they can get in touch with me at lifeunleashedacademy.com.
Okay, great. So, okay, I thought of asking you to be on this show because of Black History Month. And I am personally, as a white person, annoyed and also overjoyed in equal measure when I hear about African American events and people I have never heard of. I can't imagine what it would be like to be an African American and have lots of these things hidden. When you were growing up, what was your first memory of Black history? Do you remember?
Yeah, I grew up in Pasadena, and fortunately in Pasadena, it was a fairly, so I grew up part of the time in Pasadena. We left Pasadena in 1977, and while I was there was a lot of access to Black history. So my first memory was reading Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech at a Black History performance. I actually didn't know it was a Black History Month performance, but now like I can put all the pieces together. Yeah. Shortly after that, we moved to Laverne, which was a pretty much all white enclave. I think we were one of 4 families that lived there. And Black History Month and anything to do with Black history was completely obliterated. Like there was no such animal.
So do you recall as a child, I'm asking because I really think it's important for children, especially to have history, not only history of whatever ethnicity they relate to, but as children in history, you know, they were there too. And do you recall which figures meant a lot to you as a child? Other than Martin Luther King, for instance.
Yeah, I to be honest with you, I don't think there was a huge awareness of historical figures in Black history other than those figures that were like part of the cultural icon of the moment. So television celebrities, you know, yeah. Right? Like Flip Wilson were people that we would watch constantly on TV. And there was a you know, a real like need and an ache for seeing Black representation on television at that time. And so when Flip Wilson came on, which was in the 1970s, we were glued to the television at that time.
And Diane Carroll and
oh, absolutely.
You know, oh my God, Lena Horne. Oh my God.
I didn't see much Lena Horne when I was a kid. So the other thing that I watched a lot was Mahogany. If you remember that Diane Ross movie from the 70s, you have to watch it. It was amazing. We watched that over and over again because that really was the only representation. Now, Lena Horne, I knew about, but you know, her movies are from like the 40s and the 50s. And so it wasn't until I was an adult that I actually experienced, you know, some amazing films by Lena Horne and others.
So what, do you remember what your experience was as a child or contemporaneously? I don't care about where it comes, but what has been your experience of discovering people that have been hidden to us?
You know, interestingly enough, I just discovered someone today that had been hidden from us. So my husband, I'm gonna cheat and look at my phone, just sent me a article that was in the Washington Post that our 7th vice president of the United States of America was married to a slave. Hmm. And yes, did you read that article?
I did. Mm-hmm.
That was completely unknown to me. And then right? But you know, it wasn't like that was an anomaly. That happened. I have a cousin named Petrie who on her father's side of her family, her great grandfather was a slave owner who married one of his slaves and freed his children. So this was a common story.
Wow, yes, I would imagine so. But we don't think about it when we don't see it. Do you know?
We don't.
Right.
And recently, I've been interested in going to the Renaissance fairs and wanting to dress up in all of the Renaissance costumes and feeling, like there was a moment where I felt kind of fraudulent about it. Like, did my Black body belong in that space? And so I did some research of Black people in the Renaissance history. There were a lot of them. And Queen Charlotte, who wouldn't necessarily identify herself as being Black, was identified as being a mixed race Portuguese woman.
And she was in the English nobility?
She was queen, yes. She was married to King George.
I cannot keep English bloodlines and all that stuff. I mean, straight. The minute I hear it, I forget it. So what, like if you had a magic wand and you wanted to support somebody who goes, you know what, I don't know anything, I'm not going to read anything, but I sure would like your recommendations for movies, what would you recommend to them?
I think there are some amazing movies that really create like a breadth of historical context about Black folks in the United States. So I wrote those down. I think starting with the movie 13th by Ava DuVernay is a really good place to kind of like start. Malcolm X is one of my favorite films by Spike Lee. My daughter just told me about a movie that she recommended, and I'll find it and I'll let you know what it is. But it's a PBS show. Hidden Figures is amazing. I Am Not Your Negro by James Baldwin. 12 Years a Slave, yes, which was also an amazing book. The Story of Frederick Douglass, which has not been made into a movie, which is also an amazing book. The amount of self-awareness that Frederick Douglass had as a young boy is pretty spectacular, given, the circumstances he found himself in.
I'm just going to add something, and I should have looked this up. My husband Ken has done film scores for movies for years and years and years. And he worked on a project, I think it was called Prince Among Men. And this man had been kidnapped in Africa and was a prince and taken to the United States, and I believe enslaved in Virginia. And he was educated, he spoke Arabic, he spoke, and his own tribal language, of course, but was a math genius, as people are when they are grown up in a civilized country.
Well, Africans were math geniuses. Yeah. So if you just look at the Egyptian history, they were the originators of math.
Yes, and Muslim and Islam has a long, deep history of mathematics. Anyway, so in the You Can't Make This Shit Up department, he became this really trusted overseer, and because he was so good with numbers and he was so respected by everybody, that he was sent on an errand into their town and ran into a man who knew him in Africa and who also spoke Arabic but was a white man, and that began the process of getting him returned to Africa. And wow. if that man had come by 10 seconds later, that never would have happened. And oh man, it took years and years and years, but he finally was repatriated. And the stories, they're gold. They're gold.
There are so many, like when you said that, I was thinking of, stories like Daughters of the Dust, yes, which, right? Which is the story of the Gullah people, which I found out my husband is actually related to the director of that film. So yes, his people are from South Carolina, which is down in Gullah country. So
Were the Gullah mostly island people?
they were mostly in Savannah in Georgia.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And I believe they originated from Sierra Leone, the Gullah people.
I don't know.
In West Africa.
So
they spoke the same language.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I know that because I lived in Sierra Leone for a while and got to learn about the Gullah people and how they brought so much of their African culture over to those areas you're talking about.
Wow.
Rich mine of gems and precious metals. Oh my God.
One of my favorite hidden figures, who is a Black woman, is Polly Murray.
Oh yes. Oh.
She's one of our first Black female attorneys in the country. And she had a wonderful friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt. And there's a wonderful book written about their friendship that I highly recommend. And right now I'm reading this beautiful book, Zora and Langston, about their friendship. I'm preaching on friendship this Sunday for Valentine's Day. So
I just want to insert a little anecdote about Hidden Figures. I was in DC and my Lyft driver was a young African American man, and we started talking about movies because he was also a movie buff. So I said, "Have you seen Hidden Figures?" And he goes, "Yes." Oh, it makes me so mad. If I'd seen that movie like 15 years ago, I would have studied math, which for me is emblematic that the gender doesn't matter for people as much as we think it does. There's a snobbery about it. Well, if it's about women, then I'm not interested. But that's not necessarily true.
No, I think people want to see people that represent them, look like them. I do think that's, you asked about our young people. I think that's really important for young people, that they see representation, because it is when we see our own images doing things that there is a light that gets turned on. It's not fair to say you should just do it because you want to. There does need to be some space where you've seen someone else do it, and so you get the confidence to do it yourself.
Have either of you seen, I think it's the only movie made about Harriet Tubman. I never saw it and was wondering if it was good.
Oh, I love that movie.
Oh, me too.
It's not accurate, but it's interesting.
You can't do accuracy really with a 1.5 hour movie.
No, you can't. Although, I think as long as it keeps the the sentiment and the feel of what happened with her, I think it's accurate. I think who she had to become in order to rescue hundreds of men and women out of the South, right?
And did not lose one passenger.
Not one person. Yeah.
Incredible.
I think that's amazing. The other movie I love is City of God, which has nothing to do with American history, which has to do with Brazilian history. Yes. But I think it's just a beautiful movie. And I think, when you are, we call it part of the diaspora of Black people. It's not just Black people historically here, it's Black people all over the world. That history is also important. My daughter, who is a Howard University graduate and whom I really do think I awakened my own desire to understand Black history, reminded me today that Black history did not start in the United States of America.
Right.
That there was a history of Black people well before the 1776 founding of this country.
Yeah, I mean the I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, but the metallurgy, the industry, plumbing, the civilizations were incredibly sophisticated. And so we've been sold this colonial claptrap that, Africans were uncivilized and inferior, and it's the propaganda is just amazing.
Well, it's the same propaganda that was used against the Indian people all over the Americas. So it is the propaganda of a people who want to utilize other people's resources and their bodies in order to financially, you know, can, have financial access to that capital.
Yep. Exploitation and
Absolutely.
Yep.
Speaking of exploitation, another really good film is Amistad,
Yes.
about his English name is Joseph Cinque, but his Sierra Leonean name was Singbe Pie, and he has the distinction of having a successful revolt on a slave ship. And then went through a long trial in New England somewhere, and eventually got sent back to Sierra Leone, which was his dream. But when he got back there, most of his family had died, and so it was kind of a sad ending, even though we did get to go back.
Yeah, it was Spielberg. Spielberg's made a few movies about the Black experience.
Well, The Color Purple is my all-time favorite movie. So
it's mine too. It wasn't my husband's though. He hated the depiction of Black men, but I think what we have to realize is that the Black experience is not monolithic. It really, like there are some bad actors in every group of human beings, including what was depicted in The Color Purple. Now I might get like hung up for this, and he certainly was not happy about it, but I do think we do have to kind of show all sides of our humanity.
Absolutely. And when at the time The Color Purple, there had been so few positive depictions of Black males that you tend to get tender about the depictions that are super negative, because you hardly have any representation at all. So, the way people have pegged Black males has been, disgusting as thugs or violent or whatever. So I can see why people would feel bad. On the other hand, I am all for uncovering the experience of all women all over the world. And a lot of women, regardless of background, have to deal with violent and drunk men.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, I did find the name of that movie that my daughter had recommended. It's called A Slave by Another Name on PBS.
Huh.
It's about a 3-hour, it's either a film or a series. I'm not clear, but it really talks about how slavery was continued after the Civil War, and goes further. So Ava DuVernay in 13th, she discusses this a bit, where they made up all kind of arbitrary laws and rules to re-capture Black men, majority, and put them back into slavery. Well, this movie goes even further into that, and then really looks at the implications for even our modern prison system.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we opened the show with Mound Bayou, sung by Maxine Sullivan, and we wanted to talk about that. Can you remember when you were first acquainted with Mount Bayou?
Pretty early on, and I think when you're young, you don't know to know something. You're just, it's like, it didn't amount to much to me. Not until very recently, when my uncle passed away. And actually, I take that back. When I took a 23andMe test, I found a second cousin, and she contacted me, and we found that we had the same history. In fact, we had the same pictures. So there's a picture of our family that looks like it was the Black version of Downton Abbey, from the 1930s. And So we got a group of people together, but we started doing a lot of research about Mound Bayou. Mound Bayou was founded in 1887 by two former slaves of Joe Davis, who was Jefferson Davis's brother. And Joe Davis was the type of slave master who believed in creating equity, believe it or not, amongst his slaves. So he didn't hire any overseers. He had the slaves, the enslaved people, you know, manage their own work. And so one of those enslaved people was I can't remember his name. His name was Montgomery.
Yeah.
And so he created Mound Bayou. And then my grandfather, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Isaiah T. Cresswell, was one of the founding members. And then on another part of my family, my great-great-great-grandmother, whose last name was Lee, was also one of the founders, one of the founders, yes.
Wow. Have you gotten to visit there and do research there?
I haven't, and it didn't become like a vital to me until COVID hit. And so I haven't been able to get there, but I do plan on going. So that cousin and I are going to go. My Cresswell great-great-grandfather, he was the mayor for 4 terms of Mound Bayou.
My goodness. Well, and you're planning to tell it all in novel form in a story. What's as a storyteller, what's the positive impact of having these little known stories told?
I think, well, first of all, I think when we get to tell our own stories, you know, there's something about like dignity and humanity, we get to bring those things back to us. Things that I think were lost to us. And you know, telling stories that are little known to telling stories that are greatly known are important, because those stories are a part of who we are. You know, I think I'm really looking forward to the moment when we get to tell those stories that are not significant, the insignificant stories, because those are important too.
Is Mound Bayou still there?
It is. It is. And the plaque for Mound Bayou is in the African American History Museum.
Oh,
wow. Mound Bayou is, as of much of Mississippi when cotton left. So Mound Bayou was a very prosperous town. Cotton was doing gangbusters back in the 1800s through about the 1930s. But when now that left, just like the rest of Mississippi, it became impoverished. So Mound Bayou is pretty impoverished place at this point.
well, it reminds me of the town in, I believe, Oklahoma that got pretty much
Tulsa.
razed to the ground. That was an African American town as well. Were they harassed in a similar fashion ever?
So there is a story that that they were not, that it almost came to pass that they would be. Someone in a local tavern murdered a white man, a black citizen of Mound Bayou murdered a white man, but it was in self-defense. And so my great-great-great-grandfather, I.T. Cresswell, went to this tavern and settled it, resolved it,
Wow,
without there being any bloodshed.
goodness. Well, that's fortunate. So you're a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. We wondered about what's it like to be in a Black sorority, and what has it meant to you and your sisters?
Interestingly enough, so when I was an undergraduate and I pledged, it was the first time that I even understood what it was to have Black women as part of a sisterhood, like globally. And there is something that is uplifting about having that, being in that space. Um, and then for 20 years, 30 years, I was not active in my sorority, although my sister is. And just recently, I went to a sorority meeting because I'm thinking about reactivating. And having the type of camaraderie that I had in that space just recently was amazing. I was talking about my book and people were like, well, I'd love to be a beta reader for you. And, there's just this like built in kind of like, we want you to win conversation that is underneath everything that is amazing. But also there's an opportunity. There's something about being in a space where people share your history that allows you to kind of like breathe. And so that was surprising to me. I didn't realize that I would have that, like that space or that feeling of being able to breathe.
That's great. I know Ellen has some more questions about your creative writing.
I want to back up just for a second, though. So I'm surprised that Pomona would have Alpha Kappa Alpha.
You're surprised that Cal Poly Pomona would have an Alpha Kappa Alpha chapter?
Yeah.
It actually didn't. So I had to pledge what was called Sigma chapter. That was a Los Angeles citywide chapter because we didn't have a chapter then. It does now, actually.
Okay.
There is a chapter there now. So yeah, the big chapters were USC and UCLA.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Because not surprisingly, but again, something I've never thought of is that there are a lot of white sororities and fraternities that are white only and wouldn't allow for Jewish or for Black pledges. And I never pledged because I came up at a time when it was kind of hip to reject sororities. But every place I look, there's just this rampant racism that I just go, oh my God, them too? Really? And yeah, really. So oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, so the Divine Nine, which are what the Black fraternities and sororities are called, obviously started as a result of some of them. Alpha Phi Alpha was started at Cornell, so that was more than likely as a result of not being included. Alpha Kappa Alpha was started at Howard University, which was already a historically Black college. But we did do a lot of work with, we partnered with the white fraternities and sororities on our campus when I was an undergrad. And I have to say, I don't think that the vitriolic kind of conversation that's there around race was there back in the 80s. I didn't feel it. And now I'm sure it was in a lot of spaces, but in Southern California, at Cal Poly Pomona, I was at white fraternity and sorority parties and welcomed.
Yeah. I would guess that's more a reflection of California than the rest of the country. I don't know. It's speculative.
Now, I know at UC San Diego, they have frat parties where they have Black, face, and there have been some pretty nasty incidents in like lately, very recently. Where they have had ghetto parties and And I do think that, we do need to worry about inclusion. And I think what happens is the more you have an absence of Black faces and Black bodies in spaces, the more likely it becomes that people become abusive in those ways because it's much easier to do so.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I am a proponent of affirmative action. I believe that we need to start, that our California university system needs to start the process of having more representation of Black people on those campuses.
Absolutely. Everywhere.
But
Everywhere.
really, if you start in university settings, then which are publicly owned spaces, then you start to give Black folks in this state access to really jobs and all kinds of other things that I believe the last 20 years has reduced our access to.
Because
Right.
it was on the ballot, right? But it didn't pass.
It didn't pass. No.
That's right.
It was pretty close, so I was surprised.
So, okay, so given that my love is encouraging women to write and to write stories that include women,
Yeah.
are you walking your own talk with the midlife revolution?
Yeah, it's interesting because when COVID happened, we lost several of our clients, and things just got quiet because people didn't know what was going to happen. And I thought, well, this would be a great time for me to write a book about women's empowerment. And so I joined. Ellen has a women's writing group. I don't know if it's just for women; it just happens to have women in it. And I found a love of writing fiction, and particularly historic fiction. And my father, who you mentioned in my bio, he saw his father kill his mother and then kill himself when he was 11 years old. And he was placed in an orphanage. But what my father would say is he didn't understand why his father did it, because his father was this gentle human being, was always so nice and giving. He had stories of this man going all the way across town to get a bike so that they could ride a bike, bringing it all the way back so they could ride during the day, and then taking it all the way back across town back to whoever owned the bike. And so when I found the suicide note, basically what the suicide note said was that my grandmother was abusive to him, and that he couldn't deal with it any longer. And that coincides with kind of the things that my father would say about my mother, with my grandmother, that she could be abusive. And I just got really interested in wanting to tell my family stories, because I think, my father then, after being in an orphanage, ran away to a traveling circus, at 14 years old, then at 15 put himself in the Navy, and then later became the CEO of a big healthcare organization. And I do think that young Black folks need to hear that story, those types of stories of really overcoming the worst types of odds. My father has a story that he was they lived in a burnt out building because they couldn't afford to live anywhere else. And you hear these stories all of the time. I just think, I just really wanted to be someone that told stories like that. I'm also interested in telling the story of Mountain Bayou and how that got created. So in doing some of the research, I found that my great-great-grandmother, who married my great-great-grandfather, who was a physician, which also was unheard of in the 30s, right? There was one medical school for Black people, Meharry Medical School in Tennessee. And my grandfather my great-great-grandfather went to that school. And then later I found documentation that he was in a mental asylum, that he was in a mental asylum, and that on the census it shows both of them as widowed. So I'm so curious about this whole story. And while I may not know the truth of it, I would love to be able to like piece together enough of it to tell us the story of what happened to them.
Yeah. Well, you're going to have to just make stuff up because there's no way to actually find out. So
Well, I'm hoping that when I can travel again, I can actually go to Mount Bayou. There was a newspaper, and so there may be some historical record. Just like I found this obscure newspaper when of the suicide, which included the suicide note from my grandfather
in the newspaper.
In a newspaper. And it just so happens I was watching TV one day and they were talking about the Centennial, which was a newspaper that was enticing Black people from the South to come to Chicago. And how upset the Southern whites were because they were losing all of their, like they were losing their labor force.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I'm a little confused on the timeline. So it was founded in 1886. Mm-hmm. And you've spoken mostly to the 1930s. Were your family members there when it started as well, and then stayed there through the 30s?
Yes. So so Isaiah T. Cresswell, got there in 1887 when the town was founded. My great grandmother, who was a Lee, who was not married to him, this is on my Lee side of the family, she came already having been a nurse, already having had made, I don't know, $3,000, which was an enormous sum of money selling property, and bought 280 acres of property in Mound Bayou in the early 1800s or in the late 1800s, and then also buying property in the town.
So when you uncovered the suicide note, was that out of a Mound Bayou publication, or that was in another locality?
Yeah, I apologize. Those are two different stories. So one is on my mother's side of the family, and then my father, who was the one whose father had the murder suicide.
Okay.
So those are two different stories, and I apologize. I'm excited about both of them.
Well, I get it. But, okay, no, that's straight. I got it.
Some other interesting information about Mound Bayou is Medgar Evers lived there. And then when the trial for Emmett Till was going on, that is the town that his mother, Mamie Till, held up during the trial. Like they kept her during the trial for Emmett Till.
Wow. I think that was speaking of informative entertainment, Lovecraft Country included the Till story.
Yeah.
So skillfully. Oh my God. And Mamie Till, what a brave soul.
Really, to have shown his body the way she did, she's just amazing human being.
So if you did not see Lovecraft Country, it is one of the most fantastical, and it's got monsters in it, it's got horror in it, and it's got just trenchant African-American storylines of as lived experience of being African-American in 40s and 50s United States. And it's just,
Actually, the Green Book was something I had no idea even existed until I went to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. I had no idea there was such thing as a Green Book.
Yeah. And by the way, for Los Angeleans who are interested, once everything's back open, Clifton's Cafeteria, the tour that my friend Khalil Nelson does, he makes it a point to let people know that Clifton's Cafeteria was on the Green Book directory. And the owner of the Clifton's Cafeteria lost business because he said, I'm not going to turn away Black people. Are you kidding? And he said, if you don't want to eat here, don't eat here. It's like, and he was white as snow, but he just had a huge heart and huge commitment to social justice. So
I do think that's something that might get lost in kind of like this black white conversation that happens, that even back in the day there were allies, even my father, who talks about going and working at this carnival when he was 14, and how a Polish man helped him, and just like that man was, he said, the reason why I was able to eat. So I think we do lose. I wish we would just start telling also the stories of allyship.
I was just looking in this Time magazine of the 100 most influential images, and this is the one of Emmett Till and his
Oh
parents.
God,
I didn't
yes.
see that, but it made me think of that. I was just sitting.
he was just a child. He was a child.
Yeah. If you ever get a chance to go to the African American Museum of History in DC, yeah, and there's an entire exhibit around that, including his casket, including the simulation of his body in the casket, and then the counters. It's pretty amazing.
I think there's also a book that is fairly recent, last few years, that's written all about the Green Book. So you might want to check. I don't know what it's called, but someone published a book about it recently and how influential it was.
Yeah, I think it's.
I felt like I was in a holy place when I was at the African American Museum. It was like a temple to me. It was, and people who were there were quiet, like they were in a temple. Oh, holy moly. One of the most beautiful museums on the planet.
It's amazing how it was curated, where you walk first through the hull of a slave ship.
Wow.
That's your first venture into that museum, is walking through that hull.
Goodness. Well, we're nearing the end of our
hour. I
hour.
could talk to you for days, Crystal.
Well, fortunately, we can.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on our show today. And did you have any final thoughts to share?
I just thank you so much for having me. And I don't know who's if you have a viewership that they need to tell their stories. That's really the thought I have, is that it's really important that we tell our stories.
Absolutely. Well, it's certainly a big part of our grassroots organizing work with POP, that people do get a chance to tell those stories, whether it's to City Hall, the deciders that can change their lives with different policies and laws, or just fellow activists, so they understand why the work's so important. Did you have any last thoughts, Ellen?
Oh, I just I happen to love Self-Made, which was the Madam C.J. Walker story, and a few of my African American friends were annoyed, and I understand about that too, because they felt like the storytellers got sucked into having to make a conflict with the main character being undermined by another woman, and which was completely made up out of whole cloth, which I didn't know. I thought that was kind of cheap. Let's have the women fight, when my experience of women has been of real support. Although, there are shitty women too. I mean, come on. Of course there are. So, because we're not a monolith either.
I think that was also the same upset that was with the story. Oh gosh, my brain doesn't work sometimes. the woman who helped all the slaves. What was her name?
Harriet.
Harriet Tubman. Is
Yeah.
that a black man was one of the slave catchers,
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Possible.
which wasn't true either.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, we hope to have you back sometime, maybe after you get one of those books written, and we could go more in depth with all this really interesting Black history.
Would
So
love that.
that'd be great. So that's all the time we have for Pop Talk today. You can learn more about Pop at poppasadena.org. You can find this episode posted on Radio Jornalera's Facebook page, and we thank Radio Jornalera for being our home and our technicians and all their good work. So please share the episode widely, and it'll also be made available on Pop's website. So thank you for tuning in today. We end with another song written in Mound Bayou. And in honor of Valentine's Day, this is Let's Get It On by Marvin Gaye. Good night and good luck.